All right, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We are going to get started shortly. We're waiting for all of our participants and attendees to join us. So if you haven't already, please grab a glass of water, or a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and we will get started momentarily. Thank you for joining us here today. For those who are joining us via Zoom, I invite you all to use the chat function and to let us know where you are joining us from today. And for those who are just hopping on right now, we will get started in about 1 minute. We're just waiting for more folks to log on and join us for this really important discussion. Awesome. Looks like we have a lot of folks joining us from all over. Thank you for coming here and making the time to be in good relationship with us today here, part of the Decolonize webinar. Just to get started, if you're joining us on the Zoom platform, we invite you to look at on the bottom of the screen. There is a globe tool. That is an interpretation tool. And if you need some support with interpretation, please click on that icon and you can choose your preferred language. We have offerings in both English and Spanish today. So you can please click there. We will have both languages spoken here today, in addition to Indigenous languages. And you also can have the option to mute original audio as well. So please take the time to choose your preferred language, and we will get started in about 20 seconds. Okay, I think we have everyone here. Segulis Wagwek, Daisy Niung Yats, Anawal Niwagi Dalota, Anayade Aga, Niwagu Hunjota. Hi everyone, my name is Daisy Francor. I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Communications at Cultural Survival. And I am so grateful that we have so many people joining us, both from Zoom and Facebook and YouTube Live. And before we get started, again, if you're joining us on Zoom, please take the moment now to click on the globe icon on the bottom right corner to choose your preferred language. We will be having various languages spoken here today. And also before we get started, just wanting to also invite folks. Oh, 1 second here. There we go. Remind folks that you can join again from multiple platforms on Facebook and YouTube, and these sessions will be recorded and available on those platforms as well as our website. And so without further ado, I'm going to actually introduce our amazing moderator, Edson Krenak, who is Cultural Survival's lead on Brazil. And Edson is an Indigenous activist and doctoral student at the University of Vienna, Austria, where he developed studies in legal anthropology. And Edson holds a degree in linguistics and literary theory from the Federal University of São Carlos in Brazil. And Edson works as a speaker and trainer at the Ayuuk Institute of Brazil and is an award-winning writer. And as we saw evident in our September Cultural Survival Quarterly on decolonization, where Edson had wrote an article. So with all that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague and dear friend Edson, who will be moderating today's session, as well as opening up this space in a good way, as we always do. Edson, thank you.
Thank you very much, Daisy. Thank you for your kind words. And it's a great pleasure and honor to be here with you all. I'd like to greet you all that speaks from your morning, your afternoon, or evening from all of the world. And we are very excited to be discussing this important topic for Indigenous peoples all of the world. And I would like to start before I introduce our amazing, fantastic panelists with a prayer and a poem by a shaman from Amazon, a relative of mine, and I will be reading his words. O Almighty Spirit of the fragrant leaf lush, here we are again in search of wisdom. Give us tranquility and guidance to understand the mysteries of the forest, the knowledge of our ancestors, the ghost that reveals the spirit of the vineyard. We seek your guidance now to translate the past into the future, to understand every detail of nature, to improve our life, to reveal this. Please reveal the secrets we need. Well, Le Reborum. My name is Edson Krenak. As Daisy said, it's an honor to be here with you all and also to be working along Cultural Survival, which is an Indigenous-led organization that for more than 49 years have been working, partnering with Indigenous peoples from more than 70 countries on 6 continents. And our work is mainly to support Indigenous communities in self-determination, cultures, political resilience, and to work to empower Indigenous peoples as they strive to assert their rights to self-determination, as I said, to sustain their lands, their cultures, to fight to protect our Mother Earth, to fight to protect our rights. In the times that for many, the colonization is over, but for us, we understand that it's not. That's why we have this calling up all of you that is listening, is here with us to decolonize, to fight against old and new forms of colonialism inside and outside of our communities. We live in a world full of racism, full of discrimination, inequality, people that live in their own territories, but they don't have the right to manage, to lead, to use and to enjoy their own lands because of the legacies of colonialism. We will be discussing this important topic with our panelists, but without waiting more, I have the really pleasure to introduce our first panelist, that's Chenae Bullock. She's Moskehtu Consulting. I apologize if I don't pronounce the names correctly. She will help us to by introducing, pronouncing the important and the beautiful names of her own people shortly. We also have Ting-Hui Martukau, is Pinuyumayan, communications expert from Taiwan. We also have Bia'ni, Madsa, Juárez, López, Ayuuk, Binnizá, also cultural survival, KOEF program manager. And we have from Ayuuk, Jääy people, Sócrates, Vásquez, is also a cultural survival community media program manager. And we are going to discuss here today important questions like, what does the term decolonization mean for each one of our communities? For us, as researchers, as activists, as thinkers, as fighters, warriors that is fighting colonization. And another important question that we'll be discussing, what are the different applications of the term decolonization we use for ourselves, for our work, and our communities. Then I would like to invite Chenae Bullock to tell a little bit who you are, what you do, and after her, we are going to hear Sócrates with his first words, and then Ting-Hui and Bia'ni. Please, Chenae Bullock, the floor is yours.
Tabutne. Thank you, Katapatosh. Thank you so much for that amazing introduction. It actually just made me so emotional because a lot of the work that we're all doing, it takes, that kind of recognition from our own people, just like you just did, and just lets us know that we're on the right path. So I just want to thank Cultural Survival for really inviting me to this panel alongside some of my fellow warriors around the globe. Because sometimes you do feel like you're by yourself in your own little war path, like doing the things that you need to do. So Nadasui Sakampanayu Mashuna Tuyusqua. My given name is I Lead Canoe. I'm Butterfly Woman. I come from the community known as the Shinnecock people, which translates to the people of the stony shores. My people are still located in the areas in which we had first contact with the settlers. A lot of people may not realize that because a lot of people have kind of been far removed from their homelands, but our tribe is literally still living there. And so there's a very unique story to our survival, our cultural survival, because we have to endure it every single day, despite assimilation. I am a business owner of Moskehtu Consulting, which you said exactly right. Moskehtu in our language means medicine. So medicine, I chose to use the word medicine because there's a lot of different forms of medicine. There's the physical aspect of medicine with the herbs. I know I have been able to write a recent article for Cultural Survival talking about, plant medicines and decolonizing the ways of returning back to the earth. And so, there's the Moskehtu there. Then there's the intellectual, mental understanding of medicine as well. I wear a business hat. I actually here am in Las Vegas for the largest marijuana conference in the country. But I might be one of very few Indigenous, culturally understood in this business here right now in Vegas. And so there's a decolonizing of even walking into that space as a woman who understands the business side, but also will not compromise who we are entering in a business speaking about sacred plant medicines. So there's the medicine in that area. So with the consulting work, I do a lot of different works of helping. Really, the focus has really been to work outside of Indian country or outside of the Indigenous community and to help them better understand how we do business, how to have cultural competency, to understand what we're going through, to really understand how to work with us. Because sometimes when you're working within your own communities, you are empowering and strengthening the communities. But if you're not creating the bridge and being a conduit for the other communities, then sometimes it just continuously creates a divide. So I find that my consulting firm has been able to be the mediator sometimes between tribal governments or governments, working with different law firms for deposition support as they're trying to fight for Indigenous communities and things like that, and might not understand some of the language that we use within our own laws, just trying to help with that. So there's just a hat. I just say that I'm a vessel for creator. Again, I am a water protector. Definitely will put my ceremony skirt on or put my boots on and strap my boots up and be right there on the front lines and, assist our community wherever that it is that they need. So that's just a little bit of background about me.
Thank you. Thank you. Your words remind me about many of my relatives in Brazil, how much work they do in terms of diplomacy and translation. try to make others to understand us, to understand Mother Earth. Thank you, Chenae. Now, Sócrates, tell us who you are, what you do, your first words.
Smits magugtach te panya dat madod Ayuuk, it's rewatch Sócrates Vásquez hamon gebush magach ma etnajui ni dik shma isham gash waqem nui but shamslin wan an Ayuuk betawa an yad Ayuuk ma yad ik negap shik namajak sa yada hoek achten ik bazigish sa ma hadik te hoek achten de zene te tanne de jam na de hagap de hag to gesta jungunak hat ja mi kapsham ik majagam su yada etnajui ni hagi shagi kayuk zu yad na de na hag no mahada kun des kan zik na shan kan mun de inet. Muy buenos días, buenas noches, buenas tardes a todos y a todas, donde quiera que se encuentren, nos estén acompañando. Mi nombre es Sócrates Vásquez, soy del pueblo Ayuujk, del pueblo de Santa María Tlahuitoltepec, en la Sierra Norte de Oaxaca, México. Y bueno, pues es un gusto compartir y agradecer también a todos y a todas por estar escuchándonos y compartiendo la palabra. Vamos a tratar de reflexionar un poquito sobre pues nuestras experiencias, ¿no?, personales también, y las experiencias de compartir con comunidades en diferentes latitudes sobre este proceso de descolonización, sobre las otras formas de vida que aún existen, que aún encontramos en los territorios y comunidades y pueblos indígenas, que creo que es la fortaleza y el futuro de la humanidad está en estos territorios, en estas vidas, en estas otras formas de entender, de relacionarse, de compartir la vida, no solamente entre seres humanos, sino que entre muchos seres que convivimos en esta nave espacial que se llama Tierra. Entonces, yo quiero decirles que desde mi experiencia he estado trabajando desde hace 20 años en medios comunitarios indígenas, específicamente a la radio comunitaria, como una herramienta fundamental para ampliar la voz de los pueblos y comunidades, que se escuche nuestra lengua, que se escuchen nuestras formas de ver y entender el mundo. He conocido que la comunicación indígena, o he reflexionado también el tema de la comunicación indígena, va más allá de los instrumentos de comunicación como la radio, como el video, como la cámara, sino que lo que he aprendido en este proceso es que la comunicación indígena es más profunda y está íntimamente ligado con el territorio. Entonces, por ahí vamos a estar compartiendo un poquito la reflexión, el sentido de la comunicación y por qué hablar de otra forma de comunicar, por qué tenemos que descolonizar también la comunicación y cómo lo estamos haciendo en el ejercicio práctico de hablar y de usar las herramientas tecnológicas. Al final, creemos que las herramientas tecnológicas son un medio nada más, no es el fin, sino que tenemos que usarlas para poder reivindicar lo que somos, lo que vivimos, lo que anhelamos, lo que podemos seguir construyendo. Y a pesar de esta situación que nuestros abuelos y abuelas han vivido por más de 500 años en el Abya Yala, como lo conocemos en América Latina, pues seguimos aquí, estamos presentes, estamos con voz, con vida, con energía, para seguir enfrentando este proceso, para seguir diciendo que este mundo es diverso. Muchas gracias, Edson. Vamos a continuar.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Sócrates. It's so important to understand that decolonization is a process, and this is a process that involves communication. The shamans of my people understand that the key problem of white people or non-indigenous people is communication. They stop listening to the nature, to the Mother Earth. That's why they need translators. They need to decolonize their communication. This is so important to discuss that. Thank you, Sócrates. It's my pleasure to introduce you all to He Martukau from Taiwan. Indigenous people from a country that few people know that there are indigenous people there, right? And I'm so excited to hear from you, Tuhi. Please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your work.
Okay, hello. It's good evening here in Taiwan. It's 11 at night here in Taiwan. And yeah, not so many people know that actually we do have indigenous peoples in Taiwan. And I will talk about some of the history later. But I will first introduce myself. My name is Duhi, and Martugal is the name of my ancestral worship house. And actually, we lost our names for hundreds of years because of colonization, and we use our Han Chinese name for generations. So we're still in the process of getting back our own names, our real names. And for me, I work in the Indigenous TV in Taiwan for 6 or 7 years, but now I'm working as a freelance journalist. I'm also a PhD student in communication studies. And I want to share a brief story about my own experience of realizing that indigenous peoples in Taiwan are still under colonization. In 2006, that was my very first time. I was a college student. That was my very first time to attend the Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues at United Nations. And at that time, because as a college student, I think I can speak quite good English. And so when I attended the forum, I was very shocked because I couldn't really understand what is going on, even though I could understand the words, but I cannot understand the content and also the context. And then I was asked by some people about the history of indigenous peoples in Taiwan, like the history of the colonization and also like the development of indigenous peoples, especially about the rights movement in Taiwan, because in 2005, Taiwan adopted the basic law on indigenous people's right. That was quite advanced in a way. So people were asking me about that, and I couldn't answer any bit of it. I couldn't really tell people about my own culture, my own history, my own peoples, but I can tell very clearly about the history between Republic of China and People's Republic of China, so-called Taiwan and China. You know, this history, and also I can tell the history of during the Japanese colonization in Taiwan. And then I realized that is the legacy of colonization. That is so clearly on me that I know all these histories the colonizers, they want us to learn, but they don't want us to learn our own history. And they did it successfully because I couldn't really tell my own history as a college student. So yeah, that's my very real personal experience of encountering and come to realize at a very late stage that indigenous peoples in Taiwan are still under colonization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tuhi. Yeah, indeed. It's so shocking how many people still don't realize that, no? Your story, thank you for sharing that, made me like, remind me the poem by our relative from Canada, from First Nations, Rita Joe. It's called I Lost My Talk. I lost my talk, the talk you took away from me when I was a little girl. No, now I can write your language, I can speak your language, but my own, I cannot, right? This is so powerful poem, story, and a story that somehow connect all of us, even though you are in Taiwan, now it's evening, but it's an important story that shows the legacy of colonization, that is to wipe out, to delete, to belittle cultures all over the world. Thank you for sharing your story. It's my pleasure to share, to introduce now Bia'ni Madsa. Bia'ni Madsa is not only our colleague at Cultural Survival, but a great warrior. I work with Bia'ni now, I think it's the second year, and it's such a blessing, such a honor to work with her, because she has this kind of spiritual call to connect indigenous peoples. Then I don't want to skip your introduction, Bia'ni, but please tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do.
Gracias, Edson. Buen día, saludos a todas, a todos los que nos están siguiendo en el Zoom. Hay bastantes personas aquí. Muchas gracias por hacerse el tiempo de escucharnos en esta conversación. También saludo a las y los panelistas este día. Bueno, yo soy, como dijiste, una mujer Ayuuk y también soy Binnizá, de dos culturas en el istmo de Oaxaca, en lo que ahora se conoce como el país de México. Y tengo la oportunidad de trabajar pues en la organización, en Cultural Survival, como la gerente del Fondo Guardianes de la Tierra, en donde tengo la bendición de tener contacto con un montón de culturas y proyectos y comunidades y aprender de todos ellos. Estamos trabajando ahorita en unos 135 países ya con el fondo y pues me considero una aprendiz de todas las experiencias y todos los proyectos que podemos ver y conocer de pues, el esfuerzo que hacen, el continuo trabajo de las comunidades en sus territorios. Y bueno, como todos decimos en la organización, somos todólogos también, hacemos un poco de todo. También trabajo colaborando con el programa de Bazar y también pues teniendo mucho enlace con el programa de comunicación y por eso estoy en este panel, porque también escribo de vez en cuando artículos y hago investigaciones pues cortas y decidí escribir sobre este tema de decolonización. No me considero una experta, mi, mi línea de trabajo no es necesariamente lo teórico, pero considero que existen muchas experiencias desde las comunidades indígenas sobre este tema y particularmente el artículo que yo escribí se basa en de cómo ejercemos el poder, de cómo ejercemos el poder colectivo y las muchas formas y ejemplos que existen en México al respecto, ya sea comunidades que mantienen, como mi comunidad paterna, todavía el sistema tradicional colectivo de gobierno, o muchas otras comunidades que están haciendo una lucha constante en contra del gobierno federal para ser reconocidos en sus procesos y volver de nuevo a las formas colectivas de gobierno, ya sea buscando un reconocimiento oficial o no buscándolo, solo ejerciéndolo desde sus territorios con obviamente una presión constante de fuera para tratar de pensar que existe solamente una única forma de gobernarse y eso y de asimilarse también a las formas nacionales que se han establecido sin respeto a los derechos locales. Entonces, bueno, es un poco de mí. Gracias, Edson.
Muchas gracias, Bia'ni. Thank you for your words, for how much you were doing for us, for our relatives, for our people. It's very, very important to know that we are not alone. Fighting decolonization, we are not fighting alone. Even if you are not indigenous, but you want to fight along us, we are going to share here some of our experiences. This webinar comes from an idea that we had by sharing our thoughts, our experiences, articles through Cultural Survival magazine. You can access this magazine online. I believe the link is in our chat. But we have a first question here. What does the term decolonization mean to you and to your community? We are all here activists, people that, warriors that are not working only with our own community, but we are also in contact with other indigenous communities. We are in contact with non-indigenous people that are our allies. Sometimes they are play in opposite sides, but then we have probably a different experiences with the term, the definition of decolonization. Then I'd like to hear from you. Start with Chenae. Please tell us what decolonization means to you in your work and to your community, please.
Yes, thank you. This word decolonize or decolonization has become a very popular word, I think, within the last really 4 to 5 years. We're beginning to hear it more and more. And so, but when you really wrap your mind around it, I mean, because D is a part of the word colonize. So there's colonization, which is a word that we've been using for what, hundreds of years, and understanding what colonization is. I come from a tribe that is known to be, in the United States, they call one of the colonial tribes, because when the settlers first came here, the shores that they landed on were our tribes. And Long Island, New York, Massachusetts, New England, all the shores on the east coast of the Atlantic Ocean, that's where they landed. So the colonial states, if you will, which is Massachusetts, New York, the establishment of Southampton, which is the town in which is on Shinnecock land, was established in 1640, 1609, 1612. So the tribes that are surrounding these areas, we've been facing colonization since the beginning of that time. Now I think Sócrates had mentioned something that talked about the need for technology and understanding how we can utilize technology. And the beautiful thing about that is, see, when you already have a natural way of thinking, a natural way of being, I grew up very traditional. I grew up learning how to swim in the ocean. I literally was thrown off of a canoe to learn how to swim in open waters. I learned how to swim that way, and also knowing the history of the landscape, learning where certain areas were dug out with my ancestors' hands for a canal, like as a canal for us to portage our canoes through. And now in the Hamptons, $1 million yachts go through there. But understanding the landscape and where we are, understanding what Shinnecock means, people of the Stony Shore, already having that set foundation as to who I am, I naturally decolonize by just being who I am in this society. But the problem is the resistance that I have against colonization is going to be natural, because it's not who I am. It's not who I am at all. So the act of decolonizing, I think in many ways that activists go about it, it's like something that has to be done. For me, the act of decolonizing is just being who I am, because I'm not, unfortunately, not just myself, but we are assimilated. We were first contacted, so we're the first to be assimilated, all that different kinds of stuff. And not every single person in my community is like who I am. But at the same time, if I can teach my young people, if they're the age of 8 and they can identify 8 indigenous plants of their homelands, that's a start of decolonization at the age of 8 years old, right? Because right now I'm drinking burdock root, echinacea, elderberries, mullein, all of the tea that I need, right, to stop against any of the stuff that I'm doing with travel and COVID and all that kind of stuff. But these are plants that I gathered from my home. So understanding this, but then also standing out in front of a bulldozer, preventing that bulldozer from demolishing those plants, is a form of decolonization, because I'm protecting the indigenous plants of my community. And if community members have that at the mindset of as a childhood, then our way of living is decolonizing. Of course, the resistance that we have to have in a colonized world, and we don't have a choice, when you're going into corporate America, or you're going into a bank, or you're going into a grocery store, we have to unfortunately live in a colonized space. So sometimes our very existence is decolonizing those spaces. And, the way we present ourselves, the way we talk, I heard some beautiful language spoken by some of the other panelists, in their traditional language, in their traditional tongue. They're decolonizing Zoom, because Zoom now has to have an interpreter for us to be able to understand it. So there's so many different amazing ways, I think, that we can look at decolonization, but I love the title of how we're talking about decolonizing and getting back to the way of being and getting back to the way of knowing. Because when you are who you are, you're automatically just going to be that. You're not resisting. The world is resisting your natural state. There's the difference there. When they came over here, they colonized us. We didn't decolonize them. They colonized us. So now we're like the roots in the ground that, are just popping up. We're literally coming up out of the concrete and it's the most natural form that we can be in. And I think cultivating that growth as a people is decolonization across the world. And that's the work that I'm into, whether that's in business meetings, whether that's in, you know, people getting back to their traditional roots, because there's a lot of people that have been far removed and don't know their traditional ways, but they're still indigenous. Their blood and their spirit remembers that. And so when they're placed into a space of that, they have to decolonize themselves to get back to that natural way of being and that natural way of knowing. And that's the work that, you know, I find the most beautiful part, is because, and I'm going to leave it at this. We had Indigenous Peoples Day, New York City. New York City is one of the largest populated cities of Indigenous people in an urban setting, right? Of all over. And we had a gentleman who, his family is from the Philippines, traditional family from the Philippines. But he's been living in our urban city like for almost all his life, and had gotten so far removed from the traditional traditions of his family that live up in the rice fields in the Philippines. And he's been coming to Indigenous Peoples Day. He sat on the committee this year. He works with, he's done some things with the Indigenous Peoples Movement, and he's a videographer and a filmmaker. And this year he brought his family, and they wore their traditional clothing. They sang their traditional songs. They brought their traditional foods. And seeing that was because he was very inspired to get back to his way of being and his way of knowing, and not decolonizing New York City and decolonizing everything. He just presented himself and who he was. And that is just a simple example as to someone that may not have grown up the way I might have, or some of the other panelists have, but it's still a form of getting back to who you are, because now who you are is going to automatically decolonize this space. And the more we can do that, the more we can actually begin to properly inherit the earth and take care of her in the way that she needs to right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Chenae. So wise words. So important to know that you don't need to move the place where we are to decolonize. Is an agenda for here and now. Sócrates, share with us, what does the term decolonize or decolonization means to you and to your community? Just a reminder that to all panelists that I know it's very sad, but we have a limited time, 3 minutes for each one of you.
Gracias, Edson. Pues yo creo que la pregunta también tiene que ver con, ¿es vigente en este tiempo donde se habla de democracia, de libertad, hablar de colonización y decolonización? Es una pregunta que creo que habría que cuestionarse para decir, y nosotros decimos desde los pueblos y comunidades indígenas que es vigente, ¿no? Vigente de hablar de este tema, porque hay toda una forma de que cómo hemos sido colonizados. Hemos hablado de que estas experiencias, que estas formas, pues se ha llamado en este sentido. Creo que también que es una preocupación muy académica desde la visión, desde el término de colonización. Nace desde la academia, pero creo que hace una síntesis de lo que también se padece y se vive desde los pueblos. Entonces, la descolonización tiene que partir, o se entiende, desde 3 visiones, ¿no? Desde la visión del poder, el ejercicio del poder hacia los pueblos y comunidades indígenas, y también el poder del conocimiento, el que una cultura conoce ciertas características de su territorio o ciertas formas de vivir y estar en el territorio, quiere imponerle al otro ese conocimiento y decirle al otro que su conocimiento es menor, es inferior. Y lo otro es el estar, ¿no? Y cómo estamos nosotros en el territorio. Cuando llegó los primeros colonizadores a nuestros territorios, dijeron, es que no se parece a Europa. Entonces eso significa que es inferior y que no han sido bendecidos por Dios. El Dios macho, el Dios blanco, el Dios omnipresente, diciendo que somos inferiores porque no nos parecemos a Europa, ¿no? A la visión eurocentrista del mundo. Entonces, por ahí es donde tenemos que seguir reflexionando esta parte. Sabemos que hay muchas culturas, muchas formas de estar y vivir en el territorio. Algunos siguen existiendo y otros no se reconocen como indígenas, otros se reconocen como culturas primarias o autóctonas o aborígenes en diferentes territorios, pero lo importante es cuestionar esas otras formas que nos imponen para pensar la vida, para estar viviendo, conviviendo con el territorio. Ese es el gran problema, el gran dilema principal de cómo estas formas de generar conocimiento, de vivir en nuestros espacios, de concebir la vida, y la vida implica más allá de la persona, más allá del ser humano, sino que la vida de las plantas, los animales, los ríos, el aire, esas otras formas que son minorizadas, son invisibilizadas, son inferiorizadas. Y quiero partir un poquito de mi experiencia del proceso de mi tesis doctoral sobre comunicación indígena, cuando yo preguntaba si las metodologías de investigación que existen, ¿no? La metodología de estar entrevistando, participando, eran las únicas, ¿no? Eran las únicas formas de acceder al conocimiento, de reflexionar el conocimiento. Y no, hay otras formas, hay otros mecanismos. Y aprendí del territorio y aprendí de los abuelos y abuelas en cómo se reflexiona, en cómo se piensa la vida, en cómo nosotros hemos construido conocimiento, en cómo nos han narrado la historia también, de quiénes somos, de por qué somos. Yo me cuestionaba, ¿por qué yo no conozco la historia de mi pueblo? ¿Por qué yo no puedo saber de dónde vengo? ¿Cuántos miles de años he vivido en mis abuelos o hemos vivido en estos territorios? Y yo no sé nada, pero sí puedo conocer la historia de Grecia, la historia de Europa, y no lo mío, no mi territorio. No puedo saber por qué le nombraron a la montaña con cierto nombre o el río con cierto nombre. ¿Por qué no lo puedo saber? Esas son como las preguntas, ¿no? Y no significa que es mejor o peor, sino que es otra forma. Y creo que este mundo es así, es tan diverso que nosotros tenemos que adaptarnos al mundo. Por ahí quiero comentar esta primera parte de qué estamos entendiendo, cómo estamos entendiendo y por qué queremos hablar de descolonización. Porque en este tiempo todavía existen estas otras formas de colonizar, que es desde el poder, desde el ser y desde el saber. Gracias, Edson.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much, Sócrates. How it's important to know your story. No, not the story that they told you about who you are, but your ancestors, no, your territory. This is very, very important. Ting-Hui, share with us what does the term decolonize means to you and to your community?
Okay, so I would say that for us, it's the very first step to realize colonization or to decolonization is that to know that the history is not just what we learn on our textbook, and it's not something that is frozen in the past. The history is in us, is in our daily lives, and we can see it everywhere. And unfortunately, the history of indigenous peoples in Taiwan is the history of colonization. Just in the past, we learn it without knowing the relationship and also the influence, the legacy of all these different regimes that is still on us. And so I think that's the very first step, is that to really realize that the history is not something in the past. And then because we realize that, then we can come to the realization of that what we can see what was taken away in our daily lives. It's just like what I mentioned about my name. Ting-Hui is the name of my great-grandmother. I inherited her name. But in the past, we were educated from all the way from the 17th century when Dutch was in Taiwan and also Spanish was in Taiwan. And then that was the Ming and Chien dynasty. And then that was the Japanese colonization. And then that was the Nationalist Party from China, which they took the whole Republic of China government to Taiwan. Because of in their ideology, the name should consist with a family name and a given name. But for us, we don't have this kind of idea regarding our names. We carry our names of our ancestors. And then we don't really carry like a family name or a clan name. We have a name of our ancestors' worship house. And for my community, we only come to realize this fact last year. We lost it for hundreds of years, but we got it back just last year because the young people in my community, we try to trace back to our history. We try to remind our elders of their memories regarding our names and also the different functions of our ancestral house, the ancestral worship house. And that's how we see decolonization is in our daily lives. And also just as like the term for how we call our traditional chief, we have this term Ayawan. But in the past, we call him Tomu, that in literary translation is head and eyes. Why we call him that term? Because during Japanese colonization, they make the traditional chief as the eyes of the government in the community. They make them as like spy in the community to monitor the indigenous people, because during the Japanese colonization, the indigenous people are the most fearless fighters to fight against the colonizing authority. So we took it back. We stopped calling our traditional chief as Tomu, as the head and eyes of the government, but we call him by his traditional term for traditional chief. And also the other example I would like to give is that because, the indigenous peoples in Taiwan, now we have 16 officially recognized indigenous peoples in Taiwan, but actually we have more peoples than that. At first, while we were categorized into different peoples, that was again during the Japanese colonization, because they sent a lot of anthropologists to Taiwan. They did their research in Taiwan, and they see all these people, they live closer to each other, and also they speak the language sounds very similar to each other, and they look similar. I don't know how they really categorize. At the end, they categorize us into different groups, and then they gave us names as the name of our indigenous nation. But actually, it's not really our names. For example, my people, Pinuyumayan, actually, we don't really have a term to call ourselves. We use the name of our community to call ourselves. We don't have a term to different communities that share similar cultures as they call us. Buyuma, that was the term the anthropologists and also later on the colonial government gave us, call us Buyuma. But actually Buyuma is the name of one of our communities. So I think that was in 2008. Our peoples gathered together because we don't really have a term to call ourselves. So we come up with a new term, and that was by consensus, to say that, okay, we don't want to be called by Buyuma because that's only one of the name of one community. We want to be called Pinuyumayan. That means the people who is similar with the Buyuma community. So that's also the other way how we took back what we have been lost. And also for my community, we also try to get back how we make decisions, because we realize that voting, as we've been educated since we were little for generations, that voting is a way of democracy. But actually for us, for our traditional practice, voting is very violent, because it's like taken away the people who had the right of people who had different opinions. So we really trying to got back how we made decisions, the way how we made decisions. That is in a way, in the form of consensus. So I would say again, back to the first question, that we see decolonization is that we realize it in our daily lives, and also we do it in our daily lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Ting-Hui. Wow, it's a fascinating story. At the same time, really disturbing how your story has so similar aspects to our stories in Brazil too. There is a movement in Brazil, indigenous movement it's called Reto Madres, which means retaking. We not only retaking our land, our territories, but we are retaking our memories, the archives of our stories, our history, our past, right? And then we understand that the core of decolonization is the history, what they say about us. Then reminding our elders, as you mentioned, about their memories is so critical, so important. I'm eager to hear now Bia'ni telling us a little bit about what does this term means for you, for your community. If you wanted to expand a little bit in your 3 minutes about how you perceive this term in your work, working along with so many communities. We just before, sorry, Bia'ni, before you start, I'd like to remind all our audience that we are going to answer your questions very soon. Then we are eager to hear from you what questions you have, what else you'd like to learn more or to hear more from us. Okay, Bia'ni, please.
Gracias, Edson. Bueno, la decolonización para mí, y voy a seguir un poco la línea del artículo que escribí para esta edición de la revista. La decolonización en cuanto al gobierno creo que sigue bastante la idea que ya mencionó Taiwan, que quiere decir que no, o sea, en México al menos y en muchos países esta forma de democracia que nos han hecho creer que es la única manera de ejercer el poder, elimina automáticamente las otras formas de gobierno y las formas especialmente colectivas que nuestras comunidades han mantenido bastante de ellas y que otras están volviendo a retomar. En el caso de mi comunidad, hay muchos pueblos que todavía ni siquiera llegamos a analizar en esta forma más académica lo que significa el término, tampoco la colonización. Sin embargo, en el caso de mi comunidad Ayuuk, por ejemplo, al igual que la de muchos otros, se sigue manteniendo esta forma colectiva de gobierno y creo que esa es una forma muy importante de participar en el movimiento de decolonización sin hacer un análisis conceptual del tema. Y también creo que volver a estas formas colectivas de gobierno son muy importantes porque hace un cambio muy fuerte en contra de lo que nos han establecido durante tantos años en países como México. Romper con estas formas de participación política, con la idea de que los partidos políticos son la única manera de gobernar. Pero al mismo tiempo creo que volver a estas formas no significa seguir o decolonizar o volver a nuestras prácticas, no significa repetir un poco las recetas con todo y los errores que también existen en nuestras propias comunidades y particularmente en las formas de gobierno. Existen muchos procesos a lo interno de los gobiernos colectivos que se siguen manteniendo, en donde las mujeres estamos participando mucho más, en donde se están haciendo cambios lentos y continuos acerca de la inclusión de las mujeres en estas mismas estructuras de poder que se han mantenido. Y los que están regresando a formas colectivas de gobierno, creo que me gustaría mencionar algunos, sí, un caso que escribí en el artículo, que los que buscan el reconocimiento estatal, porque están obligando al gobierno bajo el ejercicio de los derechos en lo escrito, en el papel, digamos, a reconocer estas formas de gobierno. Y eso ha sido una lucha muy importante para los pueblos en el caso de México y sé que en muchos otros países también está ocurriendo. Gracias, Edson.
Muchas gracias. Indeed, decolonization has to do with a form of power, of government.
Oh,
that
you need to turn your mic on.
Am I on here? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Now? You hear me? Okay. Yeah, as was mentioning. Okay, muy bien. Thank you. Decolonization, as Bia'ni just mentioned, has to do with power, with government. And we know that how much the colonizing powers deployed violence, war, conflicts, all genocide, all these problems that our communities, our ancestors experience. But now we are going to the second round of questions. I have a question for our panelists. We'll start with Chenae because unfortunately she has to leave soon. And my question for you, Chenae, and for our panelists now is, what are some of the challenges you and your community are facing in the process of decolonization? And I would also add to on this question, one question from the audience that is asking about our thoughts about the work of anthropologists and other scholars. Can we consider them allies? Do they help us or to deal with these challenges or not? Maybe I'm provoking here a little bit some of our even panelists here, but I like these kind of good fights. Chenae, please.
I love that because I used to work with anthropologists who weren't Indigenous. So I was like kind of one of the only ones in the office. But that was a great question. I would say, so there's a lot of challenges that I face, right? One, the color of my skin. I am a very highly melanated woman. You know what I mean? And so sometimes that alone, when you enter a space, there's always, a challenge there, right? But growing up, and like I said, when you can start the children and embed that teaching of who they are inside of them, when they become our age, they're just going to assert their sovereignty just naturally because it's who they are. They're going to always make sure that the diplomacy, like you had mentioned earlier, they're going to be an ambassador of their people because that's all they know to be. And so that's kind of how I am. But I see that right now, there's the age of the entrepreneur, right? Entrepreneur, business, I think I've seen t-shirts that say entrepreneurs are like the new rappers, the new athletes. They're young people are really, really, especially around the COVID and the pandemic, a lot of people have found ways to reclaim their economic sovereignty. And that's something that I've been trying to really educate our young people on understanding what that is for us, getting back to our commerce and our traditional trade routes and things like that. But when we're doing this in a space that has been predominantly male, white controlled, and we enter in an industry, whatever that industry is, it could be the beauty industry, it could be the wellness industry, it could be the food industry, it could be the clothing industry, whatever it is. These are industries that we've always had as Indigenous peoples all the time. We've always had ways of doing commerce with one another. And so here we are entering in a space that they sometimes think that we're babies to this. We might be babies in the way that they scale it and regulate it, but we're not babies to the industry. Like whaling, that was something that our people did. We whaled, we traveled the world to do that. So the challenges that I find myself facing as a businesswoman and also our communities is that we come in with like we don't know anything, and that we're kind of treated as, little children or people that don't really know things. And then I have to slam it back to say, well, how is that a case when we've been here for 400 years and we still have our own government that's older than the United States, and other governments have kind of dismantled since that time. So we've done something right. We know how to do certain things, but not in the eyes. I think Socrates had used the word that they see us as inferior because we don't look like them, or we don't act like them, and we don't move like them. So I find that those challenges are something that I'm faced with on a daily basis. It could be through email, it could be through a text message, it could be through approving something. And so when you come into an industry as a leader in the business industry, whatever that industry is, they're not used to us being at that level. It could be if we're answering phones. It could be if we're, doing the janitorial services and things like that. And that's our lane that they've always expected us to be in. But when we come into an industry at a leadership position, they're not ready for that. And are we ready for that challenge? Because that also can ignite something in us that we also have to contain some of that fire to recognize, Chenae, they don't know. This is something they've never seen us in that way. They've never had to. So I find that that's a challenge. And there's different ways of, working through it, like having my medicine teas before my meetings and making sure I have my herbs, and having these conversations with this global community right now has empowered me to be able to go back out there and face that and be the boss woman that I can be, and get those things done, but also know that there's a whole world of Indigenous peoples going through the same exact thing. And this isn't just a problem for Chenae. This isn't just a problem for Shinnecock. This isn't just a problem for people that are in the academic space too. You get a lot of people and your colleagues that can have letters behind their name, but they're not quite Indigenous. And when you come into the space, you're a people that they have studied. You have studied your people because you are your own people, but they are not owners of your knowledge. They don't quite possess your knowledge, and they house the knowledge in institutions. And when you come in, you're breaking the barriers, you're breaking the chains of that. And it's the same thing in the business world. Because we went through it with academics for quite some time, and now we're finding, Indigenous people really reclaiming their economic sovereignty, and that's a beautiful thing. So I find those are really a lot of the day-to-day challenges, but the more of us that enter in these spaces, the more normal it becomes for these industries. So we're like the pioneers right now,
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That was powerful words. Thank you very much for sharing. Sócrates, what are the challenges of your community in the process of decolonizing? Could you tell us a little bit, just reminding us that we have here 3 minutes, everyone? I will not say anything. I will just show my sign. And also, if you can, Sócrates, can you share your views on the work of anthropologists and other scholars, researchers that work inside of our communities with our people, and how they help or not the process of decolonization?
Sí, gracias, Edson. Yo creo que uno de los principales retos dentro de las comunidades para repensar y reflexionar o avanzar en el tema de la descolonización es, en primer lugar, asumir que los pueblos y comunidades indígenas a las que pertenecemos y los que somos de pueblos y comunidades indígenas somos culturas milenarias, culturas ancestrales que incluso somos mucho más antiguos que los estados-nación, ¿no? Muchos estados-nación en América Latina llevan 200 años, por ejemplo, y nuestros pueblos y comunidades llevan más de 1000 años, que construyeron una lengua, que construyeron una forma de vivir, pudieron inventar tecnología, estudiar los astros, saber de medicina, conocer las plantas, domesticar muchas plantas como el maíz, la papa, entre otras, ¿no? Con saber qué hongos comer, qué plantas son medicinales o plantas que nos ayudan a entender la vida, la naturaleza, entre otras más, ¿no? Es eso, ¿no? Como primero nosotros, como integrantes de los pueblos, saber, reafirmar que somos pueblos milenarios, que no somos un invento de un país como México, Estados Unidos, Guatemala. Eso es muy reciente, esa invención de Estado-Nación es muy reciente. Nosotros existimos antes, ¿no? Y nunca nos consultaron para pertenecer a estos países, pero estamos en este proceso histórico. Y yo creo que es eso, asumir que somos pueblos con conocimiento, con cultura, con tradición, que también tiene validez de existir en primer lugar. Y lo otro es cómo seguir intentando hacer entender al Estado, a los integrantes de los estados, a los ejecutores de las políticas públicas, que es necesario y importante la interculturalidad, las relaciones diversas, las formas de convivir con los pueblos y comunidades. Que es por ahí tenemos que apostarle, ¿no? Desde adentro de la comunidad hacia afuera y apoyarnos de los tratados internacionales que también están como acuerdos de convivencia internacional, pero también como muchos pueblos lo han sabido utilizar para reafirmar su cultura, su identidad y posicionarse políticamente. Yo creo que por ahí están los retos de poder enfocarse. Y el tema de la antropología, yo creo que la antropología como una invención académica para seguir colonizando los pueblos, para seguir estudiando los pueblos desde una mirada externa, desde una mirada occidental, desde metodologías, desde clasificaciones occidentales, ha servido mucho para que los pueblos fueran colonizados, ¿no? Para que fueran nombrados como son o identificados como son. Pero creo que también hay antropología crítica, hay antropología constructiva, hay antropología militante que ha entendido que los pueblos tienen otras vidas, otras formas, ¿no? Entonces, por ahí también creo que es importante rescatar la antropología que reconoce que los pueblos y comunidades indígenas son otras culturas, otras formas de entender y relacionarse con el entorno, con el mundo. Entonces, por el tema de la comunicación, por ejemplo, yo creo que la comunicación indígena tiene que ir más allá de las formas y los medios, ¿no? De cómo estamos hablando, qué estamos diciendo, los formatos, sino que también la comunicación indígena va más allá, se comunica con el territorio. Para entender la historia de nuestros pueblos hay que comunicarse con el territorio. Hay que reafirmar esa comunicación que existe con las plantas, esa convivencia, esa energía que existe con el río, con el sol, con los demás animales, el significado de que te visite un animal en tu casa, que te lo encuentres en algún lugar, el canto de los pájaros, el aleteo de los pájaros o las formas en cómo llora un perro, la forma en cómo canta un ave en tal lugar. Esas otras formas son los que tenemos que resignificar y entender que hay maneras diversas de comunicación, de comunicarse con el territorio, y necesitamos ser sensibles a esas formas para poder seguir existiendo no solamente como culturas indígenas, como pueblos originarios de territorios indígenas, sino que como humanidad. Tenemos que repensar nuestra humanidad como sociedad en general para poder seguir existiendo. Si no, pues la tierra misma nos va a absorber, la tierra misma nos va a decir, pues hasta aquí llegaron, no supieron. Su inteligencia es demasiada para poder vivir aquí, entonces van a destruirse ustedes mismos. Por ahí es como los pueblos y comunidades indígenas creo que tenemos que seguir aportando esta reflexión y esta perspectiva de descolonizar esta forma de ejercer el conocimiento. Eso es.
Gracias. Thank you. Ya, de verdad. Tenemos que preguntar cuál es el poder de las comunidades indígenas, de los, I would like to ask, sorry, I was speaking in Spanish. We have to ask the anthropologists and the researchers, the scholars that work with us, what's the power of the community, how they will participate, collaborate in the research, right? Because the traditional anthropology, we know that was an instrument of decolonization. Very, very important topic. Tuhi, I know you have already shared some internal challenges we have among your community to work with your own leaders, to have this ancestral spiritual call to also somehow educate, to inspire, to wake the memory of your own people. But I believe that you are, as an activist, also face a lot of challenges outside. Can you share some of those challenges, and what are your views, your words on this topic of scholars and anthropologists working? I know you also mentioned that there are some anthropologists, they are doing work with your community. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience, please?
Sure. I would say the challenge we are facing now in many different regards is that we are just too used to not to be ourselves. Because as I mentioned, we've been colonized for centuries, and also during the Japanese colonization, that was the most violent period of time of colonization, and a lot of our practices were forbidden, and a lot of our practices are stigmatized. And then also when ROC, the Republic of China government, came to Taiwan, we had gone through 38 years of martial law. So that was from 1949 all the way until 1987. And then, so we have more than 40 years of white terror. That means during this time, we were highly oppressed, and we are not allowed to have free speech, freedom of assembly, all these things. So we are so used to hide ourselves, hide our own identities. So when it comes to the younger generation, like my generation, back to, that was not too far away. It's around 2013 to 2015. We were trying to revitalize our traditional crop, that was millet, in our community. Our elders, they were not that supportive because they thought, why we are growing millet? We are not eating it in our daily lives. Why? It's so much, we need to put so much time and effort to take care just a small piece of land just to grow millet. It's not worthy. And then when we are trying to revitalize our traditional practice of hunting, our elders, they got really anxious because starting from the Japanese colonization, they were told hunting is too brutal. It's to break the harmony between us and the forest and the nature. It's just, because we were told that way. So for a very long time, our elders were convinced that those practices were wrong. So when the younger generation are trying to revitalize it, try to bring those back, we got a lot of challenges from our own elders because they were so deep rooted by all these thoughts the colonizers try to put in our heads. And then to a wider range regarding this part is that, I mentioned that in Taiwan, we have 16 people who are officially recognized by the government, but actually we do have more peoples who are not yet recognized. And they are still in this process of getting recognition. And then the people who were recognized, some of them, or some of us, I have to say, some of us who were fighting against that, because the government now, they try to, again, colonize us by welfare policies. They told us that if more people are recognized as indigenous peoples, then the welfares we can get, all this benefit we can get, will be split to more people. And then what we can get is even smaller. And that worked very well. That's the challenge we have when we're trying to decolonize ourselves. But a lot of times the challenges are really from inside of us. But it's not the fault of our own people. It's because we've been under all this this kind of education for too long, and we've been discriminated for too long. And a lot of times this is so deeply rooted in ourselves and so internalized in ourselves that we thought it's the truth, but actually it's not. So I would say that's something. And also that is also related to anthropologists, because in the past, anthropologists are other people. But now we have more and more indigenous people who became anthropologists ourselves. We try to create a different I would say maybe a different fiction or a different branch of indigenous anthropologists, and try to create or try to reinterpret this academic area in a way of our own perspective. So that's another way to decolonize this academic area, I would say. So regarding the question of anthropologists, I will say yes, but I will also say no, because of course, with this new branch of indigenous anthropologists, they have been fighting really hard against the maybe traditional or more like conservative anthropologist branches. So yeah, that's this part of my response. Thank you.
Thank you. One indigenous anthropologist, I was reading his work. One of his chapters in the book says, "Enough about you talking about me. Now let me talk." I think we are going towards this direction. right? Enough to others to talk on our behalf. We have to say our words, to tell our story. Bia'ni, can you share us your thoughts on that?
Sí, Edson. Pues en el caso de los gobiernos autonómicos y colectivos, creo que han habido múltiples presiones, son muchas más presiones las que se han tenido que navegar. Los gobiernos que han mantenido estas formas, o las comunidades que han mantenido estas formas de gobierno colectivas por mucho tiempo, constantemente tienen la presión de los estados para cambiar hacia formas partidistas de gobierno. Y muchos de estas comunidades, en el caso de México, pues han tenido que vivir un poco escondidos o a la sombra de estas formas de gobierno por partidos políticos. Es decir, hay gobiernos que en lo local ejercen la autonomía, pero se ven obligados a establecer casillas, bueno, recibir propaganda de partidos políticos, por ejemplo, de votar, aunque la gente no conozca estas formas y algunos no sepan leer, por ejemplo. También en el caso de las comunidades que están regresando a las formas tradicionales de gobierno, expulsando a los partidos políticos, obviamente ha sido una batalla legal muy, muy larga, pero al mismo tiempo han habido muchos muertos en el proceso. Existen muchos casos en México de comunidades que para defender su territorio han decidido retornar a estas formas y el resultado ha sido pues agresiones constantes de parte del Estado y muertos de por medio. Y creo que es muy, muy importante mencionarlo. Y también para otras comunidades que han decidido no buscar el reconocimiento del Estado, como son pues el gran ejemplo que tenemos aquí, las comunidades zapatistas, pues también ha sido una constante guerra durante muchos años y una guerra un poco escondida para obligarlos a dividirse y a tratar de renunciar a estas formas ya establecidas de gobierno. Entonces han sido muchas y continúan siendo muchas. Y esta idea de constante de que no se pueden ejercer los gobiernos colectivos, de que el gobierno, el Estado y el gobierno federal está por encima de todo, está muy establecido en muchas comunidades y muchas que tienen este intento de retornar, pues ven una presión constante para no hacerlo. Sin embargo, creo que oportunidades hay muchas. Es una de las cosas que me gusta es que existen muchos ejemplos ya de comunidades, sobre todo que han mantenido las formas de gobierno y que las están reestructurando también a lo interno. Existen otras que han logrado luchas exitosas de recuperar y manejar sus territorios colectivamente y también que han logrado el reconocimiento del Estado. Y sí, en cuanto a las oportunidades, al final de terminar de editar toda la revista y cuando se estaba publicando ya, justamente estaba ocurriendo aquí en México, en el estado de Chiapas, en comunidades celtales, en el municipio de Chenae, todo un movimiento después de mucho tiempo de presiones del gobierno, de presiones paramilitares, muchos asesinatos. El municipio decidió organizarse y expulsar también a los partidos políticos y establecer una forma colectiva de gobierno y regresar a esta forma de autonomía. Entonces creo que los ejemplos siguen apareciendo en muchos lugares. Estaba viendo también casos en Perú, en otros países y creo que existen oportunidades porque se está viendo el resultado de manejar, ejercer el poder, el gobierno colectivo y administrar los recursos de forma colectiva sigue siendo una forma exitosa para las comunidades indígenas. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much for your work. We are going now to the last part of our conversation. Has been so amazing. I have learned so much from all of you. Thank you for your wisdom, your words. And the last part, I would like to call our attention to one of our questions from our audience. Is a question about intellectual property rights. We could expand this to appropriation. Christine Ampumutsa, I hope I'm pronouncing correctly. She is asking, Indigenous peoples know a lot of connecting with Mother Earth. How you were able to safeguard this creativity, knowledge, especially in entrepreneurship field and investment, new ideas, etc. Basically, she is asking, how do we deal with intellectual property rights? I think this is also talks about how we envision ourselves, how we see the future, the opportunities. Bia'ni mentioned that, but we could put these two ideas together. No, this is one example: property rights, appropriation, right, and how we see new opportunities to not operate in the capitalist form, but also to maybe rewrite the agenda of sharing knowledge, right? To decolonize this idea of property, the idea of possession that capitalism, the colonizers taught our societies, right? I know maybe I made the question too complex, but basically is about the future, is about how we deal with those challenges in the future and how we envision opportunities, new ways to decolonize our work. Sócrates?
Sí, gracias, Edson. Creo que este tema de la propiedad intelectual es un ejemplo muy claro, muy concreto de lo que estamos hablando del tema de la colonización. La visión de mundo en que está pensada la propiedad intelectual es individual, es pensada en la acumulación, es pensada en la apropiación, es pensada desde esta figura de la persona, cuando en realidad no estamos inventando nada en esta tierra. Solamente estamos descubriendo lo que ignoramos, porque la tierra mantiene una energía, mantiene una vibración, hay cosas que nosotros no tenemos, no creamos nada, no somos nada para crear, solamente transformamos, entendemos, comprendemos. Pero las personas que crean cosas nuevas o que descubren, entre comillas para mí, cosas nuevas, no lo hacen solo. Hay toda una historia, hay toda una comunidad que lo respalda de cierta manera, que lo crea en los laboratorios, tal vez, las medicinas, las vacunas, pero eso es a través de un conocimiento que se va generando en colectivo, en realidad. Pero tenemos esta visión muy egocentrista de que alguien lo descubrió y hay premios Nobel, ¿no?, para darles grandes reconocimientos, y ese es como que los que no vamos a lograr nunca porque no podemos pensar igual, no tenemos las herramientas. Pero ahí está la contradicción, ¿no? O sea, esa es la forma en cómo se ejerce el poder y el ser, ¿no?, de la colonización. Cuando en las comunidades indígenas hay creaciones, muchas veces o muchas de estas son colectivas. Por ejemplo, el conocimiento sobre el territorio, el conocimiento sobre una planta, sobre una prenda, por ejemplo, cómo se crea. No hay un dueño en la comunidad, porque es una tradición, es un conocimiento que se transmite de generación en generación y que se va adaptando, se va modificando. Entonces, este es un gran ejemplo de cómo se ejerce la colonización a las comunidades a través de la propiedad intelectual, por ejemplo. Y es una gran discusión en este momento a nivel internacional, porque cada vez más las grandes industrias farmacéuticas, las industrias de la moda, de la tela, del vestido, están llegando a las comunidades indígenas a copiar, a plagiar creaciones propias de los pueblos y para registrarlos como creaciones de ellos, ¿no? Como propiedades industriales o intelectuales, cuando estos han sido descubrimientos, aprendizajes de generaciones en generaciones en las comunidades. Entonces, ahí está esta cuestión, ¿no? Entonces, yo creo que por ahí es donde tenemos que también repensar cuando hablamos de la propiedad, cuando hablamos de la colectividad también, ¿no? En mi historia, en mi pueblo, en mi personalidad, en mi persona, es que yo, por ejemplo, no conozco en mi municipio indígena que existan partidos políticos, que nombremos a nuestras autoridades como partidos políticos. No existe la propiedad privada, por ejemplo, no existe la propiedad colectiva y así ha sido siempre. Entonces, que sí existen, sí hay mecanismos y formas de poder convivir y ejercer la vida en estos territorios, sí hay alternativas, hay formas, solamente que ha sido inferiorizada, minimizada, tapada o no valorizada o, como hemos dicho, inferiorizada como una visión que no puede prosperar. Entonces, creo que la pregunta es eso, ¿no? Que parece que es esta contradicción que va a seguir existiendo, porque hay estos dos o muchos mundos que se encuentran en este momento de cómo estamos pensando la vida, ¿no? Como acumulación, como apropiación, como dominación a la tierra. Hay que seguir conquistando los territorios, dominando la tierra, como si la tierra fuera algo a dominarse, cuando en realidad lo que los pueblos indígenas y los abuelos y las abuelas nos enseñan, hay que saber convivir con la tierra. No hay que apropiarse de la tierra porque nosotros al final somos un pedacito de la tierra. Somos polvo, al final no nos vamos nada cuando nos morimos, ¿no? Y eso creo que es una gran enseñanza. Por ahí, nada más.
Thank you, Sócrates. Yeah, it is true. I used to say that the property rights is not indigenous problem. It's a white people problem, because the huge corporations, the oppressive capitalism in which the society live nowadays is forcing the people to pay for everything that Mother Earth has given for free for us. And then our communities have been learning for centuries how to produce for the good of the community. And then we don't charge anyone for that. But the property rights is a huge problem for the white people. We are here to share with the white people, no indigenous people, how to fight colonization, because they are also losing this war, right? And then we are here to share our ways to fight it. And Tuhi, share your wisdom, your words, your passion with us about this topic.
Okay, it just reminded me of our traditional chief of my community. Once we asked him, because he himself is a master in wood carving, so he himself is very famous in Taiwan as well. So he got a lot of interviews, and also a lot of people come to him to ask questions and all these things. And then we once asked him that, with all these people coming to you, what exactly did you tell them? And he answered us, it sounds like a joke, but he told us that because they don't understand, so they would just believe whatever you said. And at first we couldn't really understand what does that mean. And then after several years, when we really started to look into our traditional practices and also all these cultural practices, and then we realized out of something that what he was telling us is that we have to be very cautious about what we are going to tell, to whom and what we can tell. We have to ourselves be very careful to be selective, not just because, in the past we were told to believe in authorities, to believe in school teachers, to believe in government employees. But what the traditional chief was telling us is that even though those people, they sound trustworthy, but we still have to be careful about what we are telling them. And so that's something I want to respond to the question regarding the intellectual property rights, because for my people, a lot of practice we have is still very secretly or very carefully kept to our own people, and we still have a lot of taboos that is regarding different genders, that we have different division of work, division of labor in our traditional practices, and we still keep that. And to keep that means when we are trying to teach the next generation about all these knowledges and also all these skills, we need to know who are those people we are teaching and who are those people we are telling about these stories or wisdoms in a way. So yeah, I think that's something I want to share about this, the wisdom words that sounds like joke sentences of my chief. And then the other thing about the vision of the future, I will say that even though when I was little, my grandparents, they always told me that it's useless to learn our own language, because in this modern time of world, I should speak very good Han Chinese, Mandarin Chinese, because that's the official language of in Taiwan, and I should speak good English, because that's the international language we will be using internationally. Even though they told me about this, but still they told me to follow our traditional rituals in our daily lives. For example, that if it's time for me to go out for school or to go outside, if I sneeze, I cannot go out immediately. I have to stay home for 5 to 10 minutes to see if I sneeze again. Then if I sneeze again, I should stay at home. That means the weather is going to change, or that means maybe I'm getting a cold, or that means there are some bad spirits around me, so I should stay home to be safe. And I still practice. I practiced since I was very little, even though at that time I didn't know what does that mean. And also in our tradition, before we drink alcohol, we'll dip 3 times. The first dip is to toast to the God. The second time is to toast to the land. And the third time is toast to the spirits. And I still practice that. Even though my grandparents, they told me it's useless to learn my language at that time, but they still told me to follow the traditional ways of our spiritual belief. And also we still believe in our traditional healer. When I'm healed, or when I'm ill, or when I'm not feeling well, I will go to my traditional healer. What I want to say is that even though for the past hundreds of years, we're not really allowed to be ourselves, but actually from my grandparents to all my families, to my people in the community, we still practice it in our daily lives, even though sometimes we don't know what we are doing, but it's in me, in a lot of us. So just keep doing it. Just pass it to generations to come. And of course, not just like my grandparents, not to tell me why. We have to tell our next generations why, not only to our next generations, but to the people around us, not only to indigenous peoples, but also to the non-indigenous peoples. Because when people see me like toast 3 times before I drink alcohol, they ask me, and then I tell them. And then that's a way to carry this practice and also to carry this knowledge, this wisdom to different people, to different generations. And that's the vision of us. We keep doing it. Then that's the way we carry it. And that's the way we can survive and also sustain our cultures, and also as being ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. This is so true, indeed. Bia'ni.
Gracias, estoy muy de acuerdo con lo que compartieron Sócrates y Tui. Creo que en el caso particular de la propiedad intelectual, veo como 2 momentos donde se puede seguir hablando de decolonización. Una, que es a nivel legal, que siento que aún no se logra entender realmente. Estamos, como dice Tui, hablando en idiomas distintos. No logran entender lo que realmente significa la colectividad en cuanto a la propiedad intelectual y el desarrollo de conocimiento, de ideas, de diseños. pero también a nivel local. Creo que hemos visto cada vez más a nivel local esta idea de propiedad. Vemos personas talentosas trabajando a nivel local, pero que también ya se maneja a lo interno de nuestras comunidades esta idea de me robaron el diseño, me robaron tal cosa, cuando son es la misma comunidad, digamos, apropiándose de este conocimiento y aceptándolo, ¿no? Entonces, creo que sí tenemos mucho que hacer en términos de decolonización en cuanto a la propiedad a nivel local y también a nivel legal para seguir protegiéndonos, porque también existen bastantes casos de apropiación cultural, particularmente en el área de las artes. Y bueno, estaba pensando en cuanto a esto, como que sigamos pensando a nivel colectivo. Por ejemplo, estaba un poco dudosa de mi participación en el panel porque decía, bueno, el artículo que yo escribí son un montón de historias de personas que son las que realmente están haciendo este trabajo de resistencia, de autonomía, con los gobiernos colectivos en sus territorios. Yo solamente escribí la historia y la junté y la puse en letras, pero tenemos que ir más allá y respetar todo ese trabajo que está ocurriendo desde las comunidades en donde realmente está pasando la resistencia. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, Bia'ni. Unfortunately, we have to go to prepare ourselves to enclose, to share our final thoughts, but final for this webinar, because we would love to continue this conversation through our social media, through our emails and other forms of communication in our own communities. In your own communities, you can continue this conversation, this debate about decolonizing, coming back, retaking our own traditional forms. In my own article for the magazine, I shared like kind of some things that I used to do and I'm doing with my communities and the people in Brazil are doing. We are to decolonize our history, to decolonize our ways to live in our lives nowadays. I shared some thoughts, some ideas, some ways, and I will share here 3 of them. First one is focus on community relationships. We have to believe, as Bia'ni just highlighted, the power of a community life, the relationship with our own people, with allies, with other communities, activists, movements. This is very powerful. The second, as we resonate what Taiwan just mentioned, to create space and time for rituals, for ceremonies, for storytelling, celebration. Learn about our traditional rituals, ceremonies, songs, stories, poetry, prayers is very, very powerful. And finally, my closing thought is have a decolonial agenda for the day-to-day. Decolonize should be on your daily routine as an agenda. Today, I woke up, I will greet the sun, I will greet the stars, I will greet my neighbor, I will greet my community, because I will start decolonizing my relationships. I'm not living here just to be part of a huge scheme, machine that colonize people's minds, etc. I know this topic is huge, but I would like to hear from our panelists your closing words, your thoughts, your takeaways. And also, I would like to invite one of you to also prepare a closing ritual for us, a prayer, a song, a poetry, a poem to read, any ritual to bless us, to bless our audience and all of you that spent these almost 2 hours with us. It was a pleasure. I learned a lot. It was really, really honor to me to be here with you all. And We have 2 minutes for each one of you, then our closing ceremony. Starting with Sócrates.
Sí, gracias, Edson. Yo creo que para ir cerrando o terminar esta charla, porque esto no se acaba hasta que se acaba, como decimos en México, yo creo que los abuelos y las abuelas han tenido mucha sabiduría en cómo fueron adaptándose, adoptando herramientas, tecnologías, palabras, lenguas para sobrevivir, incluso la religión, ¿no? La religión católica en muchos casos en nuestros territorios. Y yo creo que ahí está la respuesta también para cómo sobrellevar ahora estas otras formas de relacionarnos, ¿no? Esas otras formas de cómo estamos conviviendo con la sociedad en general, con la sociedad dominante. Decía algún comentario ahí me parece de Julián Antonio, de que los abuelos y las abuelas obligaban a enseñar a sus hijos la otra lengua, la lengua nacional, la lengua dominante, para que no pudieran sufrir de discriminación. Y eso es cierto. Y muchas veces eso es en realidad las experiencias de discriminación, las experiencias de sometimiento, de racismo que hemos sufrido en nuestros pueblos y territorios y en las ciudades donde llegan muchos abuelos y abuelas a trabajar. Pero ahora que estamos conscientes de eso, que entendemos que era una estrategia de los abuelos y abuelas, habría que olvidar ciertas cosas para seguir existiendo como pueblos y comunidades. Pero hoy creo que es tiempo, hoy es momento de seguir existiendo como pueblos y comunidades, de reafirmar que hay que seguir hablando nuestra lengua, hay que seguir cultivando nuestra tierra, hay que retornar a la tierra, porque el futuro de la humanidad es no desprenderse de nuestras tierras, de la tierra en general, porque si no, pues vamos a estar fuera de órbita, vamos a dejar de ser lo que somos y vamos a matar nuestra casa, que es la tierra, si no lo entendemos como un espacio sagrado, como un espacio de convivencia, como un espacio que nos da vida, que nos da energía. Entonces, por ahí es que debemos de reaprender, debemos de reconocer la memoria que hay en los abuelos y abuelas, en cómo lo hicieron para poder mantener estas formas de convivencia, estas formas de vida, y que podamos existir nosotros como descendientes de comunidades indígenas que estamos hablando nuestra lengua, que tenemos una cultura, que tenemos una tradición, tenemos un sistema de gobierno propio, tenemos memoria, tenemos historia, tenemos conocimiento, y eso es eso. Ahí está la clave también para seguir descolonizándonos. Gracias, Edson, y gracias a todos y a todas por escucharnos, por oírnos, por vernos. Buen día, buenas noches, hasta la próxima.
Gracias, Sócrates. Thank you. I will change our order right now. I will pass to Bia'ni, and then here at the last. Okay, Bia'ni,
Claro.
I took you by surprise, right?
No, está bien, gracias, porque también soy muy respetuosa de los espacios de oración. Yo soy muy joven para tener esa sabiduría para cerrar un espacio. Entonces, está bien que lo haga alguien más.
I'm not saying that Tuhi will do that unless she wants, but
no, está bien. Bueno, tal vez me gustaría cerrar también en la misma línea de la autonomía colectiva y el poder comunitario. Es de las grandes enseñanzas que tenemos, al menos desde mi experiencia propia, de seguir en la línea del poder colectivo, que es realmente una de las mejores formas para la administración de los recursos, especialmente en el contexto de gran presión e impacto por el cambio climático que estamos sufriendo. Y también retomar estas formas transitorias de poder. Reconocer que nuestros abuelos, al menos aquí, nos han enseñado que el poder no se toma, el poder es un servicio a la comunidad, y es también nuestro trabajo aprender cómo ser líderes y al mismo tiempo cómo marcar el camino para alguien más. Siempre tiene que ser de esa manera y no tiene que ser como nos han enseñado, que el objetivo es llegar ahí y quedarnos hasta arriba de los demás. Tiene que ser colectivo. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Bia'ni. Tuhi. What's your
Okay.
closing words? Yeah, I think it is. It's so important to know that we are not putting like a full stop, but just a comma. We will continue this conversation. It was a pleasure to have you. Was the first time we talked, right? And such a big topic to discuss, and it's really a pleasure. Please, what are your final words for this webinar?
Right. That is also my great honor to be able to participate in this webinar. What I want to say first is that actually we do come to, in this modern world, we have a lot of these big terms that we don't really understand, or we don't have those kind of terms in our traditional vocabulary. But actually, the more I understand my own culture, the more I got closer to my own people, I realized that we have all these practices in our daily lives, in our traditions. We just need to make this connection or this link to our practices, to those terms. And then in that way, I would say that we will realize that actually we are no less than anyone else. Don't let all these big terms, just scare us, or just make us feel that we are less or whatsoever. So, and that comes to my final the final part I want to share is actually that's something my grandparents, although they left me for more than 10 years already, but since I was little, they always told me that don't be afraid, we are here. Even now, I have this very strong belief in them, even though they are now gone with their physical bodies, but I still believe that they are with me. And not only I believe that my grandparents are with me, but also my own ancestral spirits, my ancestors are with me and give me the power, not really power, but I would say like strength, and also to be brave, to really try to link different the modern society to my traditional way of life, but also that to have this belief in my own community. And I still remember when my grandmother, when she was about to pass away, she told my cousins that don't let anything break us apart. And that's what I want to say to my community as well. In this modern society, there are so many factors that might break us apart. But when we have this very strong belief in our grandparents, since we carry our names of our grandparents, we carry their spirits with us. And when we have these very strong beliefs, then nothing can break us apart. Even though there are a lot of challenges, even though there are a lot of temptations, but still, we are who we are. When don't let all those things take our spirits and take our beliefs away. Thank you.
So true. Again, Tuhi. Indeed, for centuries they wanted to break us, but they will not, because they never was able to break us. Now our responsibility is to be, as you mentioned, to be a good ancestors, to nourish from them, to learn from them, is to pass on. Well, was really, really a great evening, or great morning, or great afternoon for, I don't know where you are right now, but was such a pleasure, was an honor for me, as I mentioned before, to have all of you, your questions. I'm sorry we were not able to answer all of them, to comment on all of them, but we are not far away. We are here, right, Tuhi? We are here. Don't be afraid. We continue our conversation. You have our channels, our cultural survival contact, etc. You can send us a message. You can contact us. It would be a pleasure to continue this conversation with you all. And to close our webinar with a spiritual moment, bring you to away from this technological channel, but at the same time keeping you close to us. I'd like to invite Sócrates to lead us in some spiritual words or ritual ceremony to close our webinar. Sócrates.
Gracias, Edson. Compartir que en nuestra cultura, nuestras ritualidades o nuestras oraciones son más o menos de 3 días. No lo podríamos hacer aquí en 1 minuto, pero sí que pudiera dar unas palabras en mi lengua y en castellano, que es la segunda lengua que yo hablo. Pues, mets muguktuk te pueden yo de patmado de Ayuuk. Ham Binnizá et Jääy nit mahatjot. Ham jigush de jikoze de jikshichnide, ma yada mahatjik mumzen mundanade, was patmadode, haude, et Jääy nit. Met kapste met majakte yada hukjachten, ben hat Jääy mim bikats yada shich yada poch, yada winmaun, yada hukjachten, benadem Shmo ima mahau, mahamuk, mahashuk, mahanuk, mahayos, mahatu. Then chamos limana Ayuuk metak kijot. Patmado undet kan hau zigo indet, kan na hau zigo indet, kan mao kundet. Yada hukjachten amdei pukzei. Pues agradecerles a todos y a todas los que están en este espacio, en cualquier parte de este planeta Tierra, esta nave espacial que tenemos en nuestra casa. Somos una sola humanidad, somos una sola energía, la tierra nos cobija, la tierra nos cuida, y pido a los abuelos y a las abuelas que mantienen esta energía, que están vivas en plantas, en animales, en la lluvia, en el sol, en la luna, en nuestra sangre, que nos dé sabiduría, que nos dé energía para seguir resistiendo, para seguir cuidando esta casa. Hay que seguir descolonizando esta forma de entender el mundo, que está dividido en fronteras, en naciones, en idiomas. Si cuando nosotros podemos entender que somos una sola energía en este planeta, podremos convivir mejor. Eso le pido a los abuelos y abuelas, que nos dé sabiduría, que nos dé energía para que podamos continuar. Y muchas gracias a todos y a todas, donde quiera que se encuentren, sientan la naturaleza, sientan la energía, la vibra que tiene la tierra. Gracias, Edson.
Gracias a todos. Gracias, Sócrates. Gracias, Bia'ni. Thank you very much, Taiwan. Thank you all for being with us.